All right, welcome back everyone to the RePHIL studio. We are beginning once more another set, and grab your seatbelts everyone. RePHIL to 99. We will get started with this episode. Special guest, really happy to honor to have Pastry join us today. Pastry, very well known member of the tiering community, has multiple top ones, including in the Dreams Reality 100 Poems event, and also first place in the Happy New Year's Dream event. Pastry, again, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to join. I've been really looking forward to this for a while, actually. Just from the minute you first started doing podcasts, I was like, "Ooh, I would love to do a podcast with Phil. It sounds like it would be so much fun." So I've just been kind of anxiously waiting for this day. And so when you hit me up with it, I was like, hell yeah, I'm so down.
Well, it's good that you have a lot of excitement. I knew you were going to be one of the guests. I knew you were going to be one of the guests that I wanted to invite. So again, glad to have you here. Can you also briefly introduce yourself with other things that you want to mention before we begin?
Sure. So as Phil mentioned, I've tiered a lot. I think most people know me for, again, T1 Dreams Reality and 100 Poems, and T1 for Happy New Year's Dream. But I'm also have two song T1s for Genesis of Aquarian and I Love Your Way. And then alongside that, I have a T3 from Roselia and 9 event T10s, and I think 6 song T10s. So there's a lot of titles in there. But I've been playing since, I believe NFO, the original NFO, was when I first started playing and when I downloaded the game. But I only really seriously got into the community around Neo Aspect, which was Bandori 2 for Roselia. And that was my first event, really. And then everything after that just kind of snowballed as I got deeper into the community and deeper into tiering.
How did you get into Bandori? Again, you didn't join and hop on the bandwagon on day one, but how did you get into it?
It's kind of a funny story, actually, because I know a lot of people, when they get into Bandori, they come in from, say, like Love Live or IMAS or other similar like idol games. But for me, I actually never really got into playing like Love Live or IMAS or anything like that. But what happened is I used to play a K-pop rhythm game called Superstar. And so back in the day, that was like the only game I really used to play. I played Superstar, or I would play like Guitar Hero kind of stuff. So I really enjoyed rhythm game stuff. And but I had quit Superstar for a couple of months when I was looking around for games. And I was thinking about it. I was like, I kind of feel like playing a rhythm game, but I don't want to play Superstar because Superstar is not a great rhythm game. It is a good collection game, but it's not a rhythm game. But so I just happened to go onto the App Store, and I was just looking around and looking at rhythm games, and I saw Bang Dream, and I was looking at it, and the style of the game seemed to really fit the kind of things that I like. So with like Love Live, it's the semicircle with the 9 circles that you click on, and then there are like other games like IMAS where it's like the notes kind of come at you from like an angle, so it comes up and then drops down onto the board. And I kind of don't really like those kinds of styles because they feel a little bit gimmicky. So I really like the style that Bang Dream has, where it's just you just have like your 7 lanes straight down, and the notes just come down, and you can see it from like the start. There's no real like gimmicks to the gameplay. It's just very straightforward, and that's the kind of rhythm game that I like. So just looking at the advertisements on Google Play Store, just looking at it, it's like, oh, this kind of seems like the kind of game that I would want to play. So I decided to download it, and I was expecting it to be more idol style, but once I started actually playing, I realized, wait, and I probably should have realized this since the game is called Girls Band Party, but it didn't hit me until I was actually playing it that it was more band style. Like you had like your guitars and your drums and everything like that. And I was like, wait, this is actually kind of lit. So I got really into the game because I like the music, I like the style, and I just really enjoy the gameplay. And I also started a little bit of the stories there, and I saw Sayo, and just everything was, the minute I saw Sayo, I was like, okay, I like you. I'm going to read just for you.
When you finally got into the game and realized that the gameplay was like super fun, did like any like particular like character, of course you mentioned Saya, but there was any other character or like band that sort of immediately like stood out to you, and you're like, okay, this is gonna be like my favorite band, and perhaps had that changed later?
It was still Roselia actually. Just because I started with seeing Sayo, and truthfully, I don't actually remember how this ended up happening. I don't remember if it was from like a card or because I just started the NFO story or something. I just remember seeing Sayo and really liking her style because she looks like an interesting character to me. She's very tall, like statuesque almost. And then just her personality, she was very serious and refined in a sense, which was unusual compared to a lot of characters that I see, especially with like idol or like band style anime. So she kind of drew me just from that, and so I ended up starting with the first Roselia story after I got introduced there because I figured this is probably the right place to start. And just reading through the story, I grew to love Roselia a lot. They already have like the music style that fits my taste the best. They have a very symphonic metal style at times. You have like the organs and like black shout. You have a lot of like piano sounds and synth sounds that mix in with more heavy metal style, which is really interesting and something that I like a lot. Um, and so the music really fit me, and I really enjoyed just reading about them and what their goals are, because I see a lot of, and okay, I'm not saying this is something that's like negative or anything, but like in general, I think a lot of stories you have this tendency to see people go in the I want to play with my friends, or I want to do stuff with my friends. They follow this like friendship theme or this camaraderie theme. And then with Roselia, when I got in, their goal was to be the best. We want to be the best. We want to be elite. We want to be the best that we can be. We want to push ourselves to our limits. And that sort of style is interesting to me just because it's not as frequently done. And it's also just something that, as a competitive person, I can empathize with and find myself being attracted to a lot. I want to be along for the ride. I want to see them achieve their dreams and reach their peak as artists. And that kind of mentality just drew me to them very strongly. And to this day, I'm still one of the bigger Roselia fans, I'd say.
It's really interesting, Pastry, because again, you're another individual that I've invited to the podcast where Sayo is one of their favorite characters. It's really interesting because both you and Star, who was our previous guest, you both of you really liked Sayo basically from the start, which kind of, I guess, surprises me because I know a lot of people as well when they first saw Sayo. Maybe it's because they played the game in day one, but they they really did not like her because of how rude she was, myself included. I honestly thought she was really rude, and I really didn't like her at first. But obviously things change, and you really see that character growth. And as you mentioned, just the level of maturity that she has, and the way that she wants to pursue her passion to improve and really be a better person, obviously really captivated me as well, and I'm sure many Sayo fans as well. So it's really interesting to see that there are people who actually just liked Sayo like right off the bat, rather than initially not liking her and then suddenly liking her. That was me and a couple of other people I know.
Well, to be fair, I did also have NFO, like the story there at the time, where you can kind of see Sayo a little bit later on, because NFO, the original NFO, being set after Umbrella and after Tanzaku, you can see Sayo after she's already had some character progression. So I kind of already knew that there was definitely like a change between the Sayo in NFO versus the Sayo in Band Story 1. But also just, I would agree that Sayo is not the most pleasant person to be around in Band Story 1, but I actually didn't see it as a problem because for me, I think seeing people who have things to work on, like character flaws from the beginning, is fun because they're people, they make it feel a little bit more real. And I've had a feeling that just based off the way Bandori was designed, I'd be seeing her grow and develop as a character. So that was also just something that was interesting and kind of drew me to it, because you see Sayo in Band Story 1 and then you see her in NFO, and I'm just like, well, how does she get from here to here? that's kind of something that got me really interested in, something that I wanted to look into. And
Cool.
so that was also just something else. Is like you can kind of see the character growth just from where I started off. So something where it's like I want to see how she becomes the person that she is in NFO.
For sure. Good. Well, that's honestly again really interesting. Again, the perspectives are quite different. Pacer, we're gonna move on slightly different topic, but obviously you got into the game quite in a different time. When did you ended up getting into like actual tiering? When did that happen?
For me, a lot of when I started off, Bandori felt like a very casual game at the time. I only really played one other gacha game, and that one I was playing very seriously. So I didn't really feel like, as though I had time to play other games seriously. And for me, the biggest draw for a game is the story. So for the first couple of months, I didn't really do a lot of Bandori because it was either I would just play in like my downtime and kind of catch up on stories while I was around. But I think what really got me more interested in tiering was once I got to around I believe it was Largo, Blossoming Largo. That was the Rinko Saya event. And so that was the point when I was just like, at this time, I didn't actually have event titles. I had tiered so little that I didn't even make it into like top 10K. That's how little I played the game back then. But I was just like, oh, I played the event and I saw Sayo and Rinko in the story, and I loved their story so much that I was like, maybe I should try and get a title for once. And so I didn't go super hard or anything. I just played here and there, burned a little bit of flames, but I didn't really go with like boosts or anything or spend stars or anything. I was just using nat flames and just playing here and there, and I ended up getting top 2.5K. And I was like, well, this title is really nice. So I kind of want to maybe start tiering more for Roselia, especially because by that point I'd caught up on all of Roselia's stories, and I was very confident that they were the band that I liked the most. And because I was caught up on Roselia, I was also starting to branch out into other bands, and I realized that I like other bands too. So I decided maybe I'll start taking this game more seriously. The story aspect is there. I'm feeling that I really enjoy this game. I like playing the game. I like the story. I like the characters. I like all of the girls. Why not start taking it more seriously? And so when I started looking into the game more seriously, I saw that there was Band Story 2, which was Neo Aspect coming up, and I decided that I would try to go for top 1000 in Neo Aspect. And so I started saving up cans from events. I started saving up my boost, and I set aside a little bit for gacha because I wanted to roll the gacha and get both Lisa and Yukina. And so when Neo Aspect came around, and by this time I had ended up joining Pupcord as well because people said it would be better to tier in Pupcord for it. So I decided to join for tiering. And again, I was still only thinking top 1000. I had no real scale for what things should cost or anything like that. So I figured top 1000 would be like a pretty achievable goal. And so the Neo Aspect came around. First day, I rolled a gacha and I had like 50K stars or whatever saved up. And I ended up getting both Lisa and Yukina within the first 20K stars. So I was like, oh, this is great. I have more stars still. So I decided to just go as hard as I could for the first day. And when the day was over, I found myself in like the 50s or 60s, something in that range. And it's like, actually, top 100 doesn't seem as hard as I thought it would be. Because I saw so many people being like, oh, top 100 is going to be incredibly hard. It's going to be really difficult. It's probably going to be very woke. And the first day, I didn't really get that feeling. So I was like, maybe I'll just keep playing the same amount and try to go for top 100 instead. As it turns out, that top 100 was more than some top 10s were.
Yeah.
So again, I had no scale for this kind of thing. So I didn't realize that this was anything unusual for the time. I was just like, oh, there's 100 people going for this event. That seems about right. This seems about like how competitive I would expect something to be for that. I have to put in like serious time. I have to pay I have to spend stars. I have to go out of my way to free up time for this. So I was just coming back from work. I'd get home around like 7 o'clock every day, and then just spend like the next 5 to 6 hours tearing in pub court. And I was like, yeah, this seems like a totally normal amount of time to play for a top 100. And then I found out later on that not only is that not this norm, it's by far the most woke top 100 has ever been. So, you know, kind of had a interesting start to my tiering career. But
it's so interesting. That's sort of like your litmus paper test, right? Like your litmus paper test of like, oh, like this is tiering. Oh, you know, you're able to like basically do like top 10 hours in one event and be like, yeah, this isn't too bad. And then I guess the rest is history when you realize that, well, maybe just putting that effort, that same amount of effort, could give you just a lot of top tens, maybe even a top one.
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny because I actually didn't even think I was going to keep tiering after Neo Aspect. You know, I got my top 100, and I was down like $300 after spending like 30K stars for it, and I was like, this was fun, but I don't know how more frequently I want to do this, right? Because you know, I don't know if I should just be dropping $300 for every time I want to tier events and stuff like that. Clearly, that did not really work out the way it was intended.
Nope. Yeah, it's just, you know, $300. Yeah, I don't want to spend any more than that. And yeah, look where we are now.
Yeah, let's not talk about how much more we spent on this game.
Yeah,
it's not going to be a pleasant topic.
So what convinced you to continue tiering? What kind of told you that, hey, like I want to do this event now, and maybe I want to do this event? So what kind of convinced you to stay and continue tiering?
To put it succinctly, I got whale baited. So what happened was the next Roselia event, basically what I decided was I'm going to just tier Roselia events and I'll just do T100s for those because they seem like they're pretty competitive and that'll probably be as far as I can go. And so my friend, Suyahas, she's a T1 Summer Zelia. At the time, she was going to go for, I believe, top 10 Summer Zelia, and she was trying to find a server for it and everything. And what ended up happening is that there was actually so little people in the roster, and the T1 themselves was not even doing it, that Sue ended up becoming T1, and she wanted people to play with her. Like, she needed a roster. So she kind of whale baited me into going for top 10 because she was like, yo, it'll be totally free. It'll be just like Neo Aspect, but you'll get like a T10 instead of a T100. There's literally no competition. It'll be so free. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. So I ended up going along with it, and I went for it. And then as the event got closer, it was like, well, actually, we don't even have a T3. Maybe I should do T3. And I was like, I kind of baited myself into going for it. And after that point, it was like, yeah, I went for Summer Zelia, and it was my first time being in a proper tiering server, or I guess being a runner in a tiering server, rather. So the experience was so different from being in Pupcore doing Neo Aspect T100, right? It was so much like faster. We got gains much more efficiently, and it was just a lot more fun because in Pupcore I was just playing in a room, whereas like in the tiering server, you know, I was chilling in a voice chat, talking with friends that I built and made in the community. We were just fucking around for like so much time, and it was just like a lot more fun of an experience. It's like, honestly, tiering is actually funner than I thought it would be, and I think I came out of Summer Zelia having a lot more fun with tiering and enjoying being in a server. So I was like, maybe I'll just start doing this a little bit more frequently. And I'll just decide just for T10s because I feel like podiums would require a little bit too much time. You know, that podium that I did in Summer Zelia, I was basically playing almost every waking moment that I had because I was doing it around work at the same time. I didn't take time off work or anything, so it was just like I'd get home, play, and then play until like 3 or 4 a.m. and then go to sleep and wake up at like 6 a.m. So it wasn't a particularly fun experience having to juggle work around it. So but I figured T10s not too bad. I could probably keep doing them, and so I just decided I want to keep tiering for Roselia. I want to keep tiering for Sayo, and so every single time there was an event that I wanted to do, I would just say, "Hey, I want to do this," and then I tiered it.
Mm.
And then also it's just it was a few months after Summer Zelia when they announced the Dreams, Reality, and 100 Poems event. And at this time, Aya Sayo were both my top two characters and my rare pair. So having an event that featured both of them, I was like, okay, this I will definitely T1. That's the event that I want, no questions about it. So I also started picking up events both because I wanted to tier them and get the titles, but also because I wanted it as a learning experience.
Mm.
So I felt, even though at this point, I had the T3 from Summer Zelia, I still felt like I myself was not a great tierer. So I figured, what's the best way for me to practice tiering? Just tier more, right? So I started picking up events just so I could play more and get used to tiering, because I figured the more I tier, the more prepared I'll be for Dreams, Reality, and 100 Poems. And so that's just how I kind of ended up picking a bunch of events and tiering them all and slowly pushing myself in every single one of them just to become a little bit better and be prepared for the ISIO event.
So of course we'll definitely talk about your experiences in that event very soon. I did want to go back because again it was it's honestly really funny to see how your progression came from. Oh, I kind of got top 5,000. And then, oops, I got top 100. And then, oops, I got top 3. That was...
yeah, I just kind of like skipped steps in there. I didn't even get...
You definitely skipped quite a few steps there. What kind of made ultimately what really made tiering fun for you? Because like again, for a lot of people when they see people tier, they think that it's just a lot of no fun. You're just playing the same song over and over again. Maybe maybe they even have the wrong impression that you're just sitting on the screen 24/7, just tapping notes all day every day.
I mean, I don't know if I would say that's necessarily wrong.
Well, I mean, you were still balancing work and and other things, yeah. But what would you say would make tiering the most fun? Because again, you've been doing this for so long, and I know a lot of people, they just generally don't have that sort of stamina. Maybe if they're just not even sure how tiering works, what would make a tiering experience fun and something that you feel is most rewarding, and why you keep doing it?
Yeah, I think really the reason why I do tier so much is just the people that I tier with. A lot of the times, when it comes to just like playing the game and tiering, it's not necessarily very engaging gameplay, right? Or you're just playing the same song over and over and just tapping as fast as you can. But what made it fun for me was working together with people and having a collective goal that everybody was working towards. And for a lot of people, I didn't really get to know them until I tiered with them, and we were spending all this time playing together, sitting in VC together, talking together. I got to know people more. I got to learn a lot about my friends, and I got to have so much fun just sitting in a VC and shooting the shit with people. Because when all we're doing is just tapping the screen 24/7, we kind of need to find things to entertain ourselves. And so a lot of times I'll be just fun stuff like back in Summer Zelia, we had been reading really cursed fan fiction in voice chat.
Oh no!
It was extremely cursed. It was extremely cursed, but it was also just fun, and just like whether it's like watching movies with people or listening to older tiers telling us their stories about like this event and that event. It was just like the community aspect of it that really drew me into it, and I was like, tiering itself might not be that entertaining, but tiering with my friends makes it fun.
And again, that's sort of why we have tiering servers. I know, again, in the past, like, you know, when I first got into it, I never even knew that tiering servers existed. But lo and behold,
Right.
those were a thing, and you need to, you know, tiering servers are built to not only make tiering a efficient experience to make it easier for everyone to get their goals, but also, again, at the end of the day, you gotta you know, keep each other company, make it fun, and make it exciting and something that it's rewarding to do. So
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
I do agree. I do agree with that. Now, of course, when you started planning your T1 for the ISIO event, you had to you know, build a tiering server and start getting support. And so, maybe tell me a bit more about that experience. You know, again, this is going to be your very first T1. You've already done a lot of practice with other events in the past. So how did it lead to you, of course, building that tiering server and building the roster and building the necessary preparations for you to get that T1?
So I guess actually back in that time, we actually didn't really make tiering servers too much in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Like nowadays, you'll see tiering servers come up all the time the minute an event is announced, right?
Mm-hmm.
But actually, back when I was playing and when I started getting active and when the ISI event was even announced, people didn't make tiering servers in advance.
Mm-hmm.
We made them like maybe like 2 or 3 months before the event dropped. And so I didn't intend to necessarily do it this way, but what I knew at the time was that there was somebody else who did say they were interested in doing the event.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I didn't want to fall behind necessarily and end up in a situation where I was at a disadvantage due to lower support, because the person that had said they were interested in it was somebody who was more well known in the community at that time than I was. They already had their own T1. They were a fairly prominent figure, and so I thought to myself, well, if I want to get around that, I should get to collecting as much people as I can, and I'll try to end so that way I get my name out first and I get all of the support. So I may be partially responsible for the current meta of announcing tiering servers early because I created my server like 9 months in advance and started collecting people from there.
Mm.
And so the way I approached it is first I wanted to pick people that I was friends with and I knew I could trust. So I started by creating the server, and I used the Roselia as a template, and just going off of like the other servers that I had been in at that time. I kind of used them as a template for what I wanted to build, and then added on top of that for stuff that I wanted to personalize the server with.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I ended up going more in depth on the information and the efficiency guidelines and all that stuff because when I joined, it was just really simple. You get like one line per rule. It's just a very simple tap fast. Don't be like off sync. You know, like it's
Mm-hmm.
really short, and I felt that a lot of times it could get kind of easy to make mistakes
Mm-hmm.
or not be aware of like certain situations that a lot of people just take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So I started by going more in depth on rules, and I basically went uh, kind of recreated the rules and guidelines and efficiency stuff um, the way that I wanted to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had to pare it down a little bit because I got a little too wordy at points.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so first I started by designing the server based off of what I saw from other servers and adding in what I wanted to have. And then I started by approaching people that I knew were my friends and would support me. So I would go to the people that I already tiered with. So the people that I had done some Roselia T10 with, or people that I had T10 with in other events. I would come to them and say, just start off with DMs and be like, hey, um, I'm going to be going for this event. Would you be willing to support me? And everyone was always just like, yeah, of course, I'd be happy to support. So I
Mm-hmm.
started collecting people that way. And then at some point later on down the line, once I don't remember exactly when it started. It might have been cycling seasons, but or maybe my ideal. But sometime around there was when tiering like server portal started. So I'd start advertising from there for more general people. But I was also just always on the lookout for people that I would want to have in a roster. And that was the harder thing to find, really, because a lot of people would say, "Yes, I'm down to do this," but then drop later on. And so I'd have like a lot of, how would you say, like a lot of flux in the roster that I had. A lot of people that ended up on the final roster actually only ended up there within like the week leading up to the event. So because I wanted people that I knew would be interested in doing the event and kind of would be more willing to stick with it, I also started kind of scouring places for people that didn't really interact with the community at large, but might be potentially good candidates to play. And so that's how I ended up finding Sal online because I saw her when she was talking about like ISIS stuff, and Sal being the premier ISIS fan. I figured there's no way she doesn't want to tier this, and that's actually also how I found you as well because I saw you were posting about it. So I reached out and was like, I'm also tiering this event. Would you want to tier with me, right? And so that's kind of how I approached it. I approached it from a support standpoint because in my opinion, the thing that was most necessary for me is having people to play with, right? The rest, if it comes to my personal ability, I have enough confidence in myself that I think I can handle it. Anything playing wise, but it would be for naught if I didn't have people to play with, right? So that's kind of what I was prioritizing most when I was building the server. I was trying to find people that I could rely on to play with me and people that would be good for T10, especially because the people that you play with the most in tiering servers, especially as T1, is your podium and your T10. And I just got lucky that I had a really strong roster. I had people that were very accomplished. Sue, the T1 for Roselia, the person that I T3'd with, she decided to be my T3 last second. I got Hinaya, he has 3 T1s. He's a really strong tier. I got Ku, I got Zippy, and even like the people that were kind of unknown quantities. I think this was Moon's and Sal's first events. They both did so well and played really well. And I was just like very happy with how that whole thing turned out because I took kind of gambles on picking up people that were unknown quantities and they worked out really well.
Yeah, for sure. Again, Moons and Sal definitely were new, and of course, you reached out to both of them and were able to secure that spot. And I'll be talking with Sal again, probably after an upcoming event, and she'll probably be talking a bit more about that experience as well. And again, I guess I just want to throw out there as well, like Hinaya was just coming off another T2 before that event.
No, right? It was a T1. It was a T1.
Okay, T1 and then the T2. That's crazy.
It was actually really, really funny because he came up to me. He was actually one of the people that joined 5 days or so before the event, and he kind of just came up to me and was like, "Hey, do you have a T2?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And it's like, "Can I be your T2?" And I was like, "Yeah, but are you gonna be okay doing like a T1 into a T2?" And it's like, "Yeah, it'll be fine." And he's like, and it turned out that the whole reason he wanted to do this was because he was like, I can get a T1 on a Hina banner into a T2 on an Aya banner back to back. So I can do a Hinaya. And I was like, oh my god, Hinaya. He seems so proud of himself for that too. I was like,
these super realists, man.
This logic.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, you can't really complain about Hinaya for a T2. That's
for sure.
He's so strong.
For sure. One more question before we go to a quick break. But again, you did mention about how, like, your approach was definitely trying to, gather support and make sure that you wanted to get the necessary support, and also get just, you want to be selective, but also kind of take a gamble with some of these with your roster. Obviously now, I just want to ask you, like, your opinion about how sort of things have changed from perhaps in the past. You've seen that, when you're trying to find a tiering server, you kind of have to find it on your own, or maybe, people are asking you or finding you to gather support. Versus now, as you can see, there are a lot of like tiering portals. So it's a lot easier more than ever to join tiering servers. So what do you think about the differences and how and that shift between tiering before and tiering now?
I'd say it has its pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, when I started, right, like I mentioned, couldn't really find tiering servers unless you went out of your way to ask. And so when I started, I actually didn't really join tiering servers up until Roselia.
Mm-hmm.
So there are events that would be going on, like Beating the Rain and all that stuff. And I would have friends that were tiering it, but I didn't join the tiering server because my perception of tiering servers at that time was that it was something where only like the best of the best were really allowed to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I was kind of worried that if I would ask about joining, I would be just told like, no, you can't really come or whatever. It kind of felt like a different level to where I was at the time. So I was kind of concerned about asking to join tiering servers back then because I just didn't think I was necessarily capable of being a proper efficient player back in tiering servers. And so actually the only tiering server I joined before Roselia ended up being for Growing Up Sisters, Gus. And that was only because I just happened to be playing in MBN with people who were in the server, and they were just like, hey, it probably makes more sense for you to just join the server so that we can coordinate there instead. And so that's how I ended up joining my first server. And but yeah, even after Roselia, I didn't really join tiering servers too much, just because it felt like it was something that I would have to go out of my way for, and just something that I wasn't necessarily sure I was allowed in, because it felt like it was kind of like I was asking permission to join the servers. But and then kind of once things switched around and we started going with this whole server portal meta, it became easier because people posting server links publicly meant they're okay with people from whatever server they're posting in joining the server. So it didn't feel like I was asking for permission or that it was like a barrier for entry, right? It felt like I could just jump in and join and not really have to worry about whether I fit or not. And I mean, at this point, I was a little bit more experienced with tiering servers, but even then, it was kind of just like, I don't necessarily want to join things without really like being requested to join. But so I felt a lot more at ease joining servers once tiering server meta became a thing, or the portal meta became a thing. So overall, I'd say the biggest benefit of switching to the current system where we have all these portals and everything is that it's just so much easier to get support and have people joining you. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to really like go out of your way to find people to the degree that I was doing. You can just post a link and people will come and find you, really. That being said, it definitely does come with its own like downsides, in that posting public server links means you can also end up with people coming in that you're not necessarily prepared for, or that you might not want in the server. It was actually something that happened with Karuta, the ISI event too, where somebody shared the link to somebody outside the server who had been contesting for T10, and the T10 just happened to just end up joining the server while I was in the middle of one of my naps. So I just ended up waking up and it's like, oh yeah, we have a pub T10 in the server now. What do we do? And I was like, oh, All right then. So you
Uh-oh.
definitely have those kinds of experiences where you might not necessarily want specific people in your server, whether that's competition or people that have caused problems before. And I know quite a few people run a ban list that they just have people banned from the same servers over and over because of problems they caused in previous servers. So I mean that's like one issue that you might have to keep in mind with having open servers like this. And then just the other thing that I see is I see a lot of people who will post server links despite not really doing anything in the server that they're posting in.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's up to the T1 and the mods of that server how they want to run things. But I personally don't really like posting my server if I don't do anything for the server. Like it feels a little shameless to me
Mm-hmm.
almost that I'm just coming around asking for support when I didn't do anything to help people in the server. So why would I be expecting them to help me? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely people who will do that and post their server links, and it's just not something that I particularly enjoy seeing. So when I do my servers, I generally try to limit the server portals and stuff like that to people that actually helped fill in the event. So that at least for me, when I let people post server links, I know it's somebody who actually helped out and um, did their part, so to speak.
For sure, for sure, for sure. It is definitely very interesting again with how like things have changed. I know like definitely because of the fact that again, as you mentioned, tiering portals exist. It's so much easier to find server links, especially a lot of people are just a lot more willing to open up and be able to have new people join, and as a result, the community has grown bigger than ever. Of course, opening up to more people means that there's the probability of being able to meet with let's just say relatively problematic people it does
Mm-hmm.
go up a bit, but again that's just something that we are actively trying to work on. I know that it's still a work in progress for many of us to try and minimize those kind of interactions as well. But again, generally for our viewers, right, for our listeners, if you are a bit shy on how to join tiering servers, again, we are doing what we can to make it as hopefully as accessible for everyone as possible. As long as, of course, you follow just basic etiquette, right? Just kind of follow the basic rules and make sure that you make it an enjoyable experience not only for yourself but also for others. We're very welcoming, and we'd be very happy to have more people join the tiering community. It definitely
Yeah,
makes
I
things
mean,
quite interesting.
everybody has to start from somewhere, right? I there was a time, as you just heard, when I wasn't even in tiering servers very much.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of people is just like it's just getting that first step in the door.
Hmm.
Sometimes being given a chance to try.
Yeah, and
You never know.
everyone's first step in the door is different, right? Like for me, it was you. So, and then I hope that I could also be first step for many people as well, because again, it's kind of nice to be able to pass that baton and sort of be able to hopefully share that first experience for other people as well. The way that I
Yeah,
kind of got that first experience in the ISIO event as well. So, yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I would also want to point out that it's also a good thing for the game itself if there's more people in tiering communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
You generally find that as a pubber, trying to compete against a tiering server is really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Tiering servers are just more organized. They have more people to play. They're more prepared for fights than a lot of pubs will be, and so you can kind of be discouraged almost as a pub trying to play and compete for T10s. So what ends up happening with more people entering the tiering community is that you start to see that it becomes less, oh, there's only one server for events and only these people going for events, to there's multiple people going for events, multiple servers, and it ends up with everything becoming more competitive as a result, which I just think is more healthy for the game in general.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking as somebody who has been in competitive T10s as well, yes, it kind of sucks having to spend so much time playing the game and having to fight for it, but also feels a lot more deserved once you get the title. Uh, and just in general, I think it would be better for the game as a whole to have more competitive events, which luckily has been happening. Actually, a lot of
For
the
sure.
previous events we're seeing like so many more competition. We even just recently beat JPT10 in the Summer Hello Happy event. You know,
Yeah.
just it's a good thing to see in terms of the health of the game.
For sure. For sure. For sure. I'll definitely be talking a little bit more about your overall experiences of some of these titles. And your experience, but first of all, we're just going to take a quick short break on the podcast on the YouTube video. We will be right back. Refill in 1 minute, and we will see you soon in the next set. The Refill Studio is brought to you by the UNGA Discord server. Feel free to join us. Links are in the description below, and you'll be able to join our community who's passionate about Bang Dream and tiering in the game, and you'll also get the chance to meet with some of our special guests featured in this podcast series. It's a great time, fun place to host events, and we hope to see you there. The Refill Studio will be back very shortly. All right, everyone, welcome back. Refill complete. Let us continue the set. Again, special guest Pastry has joined us today, and we've been talking quite a bit about many of the experiences he had first joining the tiering community and how it has grown for the past year and a half, and how it's been especially been changing and evolving as time goes. I do want to talk a little bit more about your personal experiences now, because again, not only you ended up getting first place in the Dreams Reality and 100 Poems event, but also first place in the Happy New Year's Dream event. So how did that sort of transpire? And in general, what were your feelings after getting both of those titles?
So New Year's is a bit of an interesting one because it was a little different from Dreams Reality and 100 Poems, where I saw that event and I was like, I want to T1 this. This is my dream event. I am going for this. I will do whatever it takes to get this T1.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a lot of plans that I wanted to go through with Dreams Reality and 100 Poems that didn't quite end up working out. I wanted to put on a great showing. I wanted to go try and beat JPT1 for that event, which was 55 mil at the time. And so what ended up happening actually is that there's only so much you can really do about trying to record break if you don't have fills, right? Fills, of course, meaning fillers, not you, Phil, but also
just multiply me. Just multiply me,
also
right?
kind of you. But yeah, just because we got a incredibly dead event for ISIO, and I mean, while it's nice in that everyone was able to relax and kind of take it easy for their T10 runs and their T100s. It's not quite so great when you're trying to go for a record. If you're trying to go for a record, you want the event to be booked because then people will have to play and fill for you. But that wasn't really the case. So it ended up being I didn't quite reach the goals that I wanted to achieve that event, but it ended up. But I was ultimately okay with it because I ended up having a lot of fun just playing the event and having PC with all of my friends. And everybody that I've heard from after that event talks about how much they really enjoyed that server and how much fun they had with it. So it may not have ended up with the goal that I wanted to, but I think ultimately I came out with a good experience overall. I was able to push myself further than I had pushed myself before. I got like a decent goal, and I was really just very honored by how many people came out to support me and how much fun people had with my server. You know, everyone was telling. I had so many people just messaging me to follow up on me. It's like, how are you doing? I hope you're doing okay. Make sure you drink water. You know, I'd have people coming into VC just to help keep my spirits up. And I think most tiering servers back then were not really that big. They were like maybe like 100 something at most. And then I ended up with 173 people in my server. So it was probably one of the biggest servers at the time. And so it was just overwhelming to have so many people coming out to support me and think of me, and just in general come out to check in on me, support me, and show me all of that love. So I ended up being very satisfied with the event, despite not hitting that JPT1 goal. And then also just the title was really nice, and it was just such an exhilarating feeling coming out of it and having that title, because it was like, this is mine. This is my T1. That's never gonna go away. And it was just a whole year of thinking about it and planning and just coming up with everything I wanted to do for the server. Just having all of that be actualized and realized was just a wonderful feeling.
For sure.
And so it was a really different experience from that compared to New Year's, because what happened with New Year's was actually that I initially had not actually planned to go for T1. But I did want to tier the event because, I'm a bit, I obviously Sayo's in the event, so I was going to tier it regardless. But I'm also actually a pretty big Akko fan. And I have a bit of a weird tendency where if I like somebody and it feels like they're underappreciated, like they don't get as much love from the community at large, I'll go harder in my appreciation to try and make up for it. It's just it's kind of like something that's been around since even like the days when I was into K-pop fandom too. It's like I like to root for the underdogs, and to me it felt like a lot of people at most they like Akko, but there aren't a lot of Akko stans, and I really like Akko, so it kind of almost drove me to want to take the event so that I could tier for Akko and show my love for somebody who's also one of my top Roselia characters. And so it went like something like, I think 5 months almost, with absolutely nobody claiming T1. And so eventually at that point I was like, okay, you know what? Nobody else seems to want it. I'm gonna go for it. I will get this T1 for Akko, and I will do what I can for it. And with New Year's, it was a little different because I honestly had so much trouble finding people who were looking to tier it. Like at least with ISIO, there would be people who would say yes, I'm down, but then they just kind of like drop later on. But every time somebody dropped, somebody else would show up to want to tier it. It was kind of like the Hydra in that sense. You kind of like one head and then two heads show up to be like, I want to tier this now.
Yeah.
But with New Year's, it was actually kind of a struggle finding people to tier it. So for a while, I was just kind of like not really sure how it was going to end up going, just because I didn't really have much of a roster. But then what ended up happening is that around the last few months before the event started, people finally started to say, hey, come out and be like, hey, I want to tier this event. Do you have space in your roster? And it included people that didn't really tier too much before then either, like Star was on the roster, and I think Star hadn't really tiered before then. I got Yahir, who I honestly had no idea who this guy was. He just messaged me and he was like, hey, I want to do New Year's T10. Do you have space on your roster? And it's like, yeah, sure. It's like, okay. He joined, and then it was just like radio silence until the event, and then that's when he actually showed up and started doing stuff. So it was definitely just like I wasn't really sure how this event would go comparatively, but what actually ended up happening is that I was in a position where I actually had a really good team for the event too, because it was a versus live, and I had everything but Valentine's Kanon. So what I was gonna do is I was gonna roll the New Year's banner Akko and then try to song tier as well as event tier, because it just looked like I would have the ability to do that. And I wasn't really expecting much from song tiering because I would not consider myself a particularly good song tierer. You know, I can AP songs, I can play decently, but I wouldn't really put myself in the same tier as people like Noel or K10 who do this kind of stuff like much more regularly and much more easily than I do. But by some coincidence, it actually turned out that nobody in the New Year's event had the optimal team. Everybody was missing Valentine's Kanam. So actually, I had the optimal team. And so I was like, actually, maybe I can do better than I expected because the event was pretty quiet. Not too much competition was going on. I did my initial rush. I played a decent amount per day, but not enough that I was feeling really tired. So I was like, you know, maybe I have a chance at tiering for song titles as well. So really, with New Year's, it was kind of different where I wasn't even really thinking about the event tiering so much as I was about song tiering. But I kind of got hard stuck on song tiering for like a good couple of days. So I ended up I was in third place, I believe, on the last day, and I was behind Rowlet and Ichibel, who are both much more accomplished players and song tiers than I am. So I kind of had this feeling that I was probably just going to get a T3 and that's okay. Not really too concerned about it. But I decided to make some few changes when doing my final runs that day. And so basically what happened was when I approached song tiering, obviously the skill order matters a lot with song tiering, right? You can have like a good run and have it amount to nothing just because you had bad skill order. And so the way I was approaching song tiering before then, and the way I was approaching at this event was that I had skill order on, and I was looking for the optimal skill RNG. So if I saw a skill that was out of position and not the right skill, then I would just kind of doormat the rest of the way through it and just kind of skip the song more or less. And I think what ended up happening is that when I did end up with optimal skill order, when I ended up with a good skill order, I would see it as, oh, this is the one. I can't mess this up. And the anxiety and the stress of feeling like I had to be perfect that run ended up with me having bad runs. So what I eventually did on the last day is I just turned off everything. I turned off the skill order. I turned off the effects. I turned off everything and just stopped focusing on the skill RNG and only tried to focus on the notes without really worrying about whether this would be a optimal run or not. And switching to that mentality actually ended up with me putting out much better runs than I had been putting out before. And I think switching my mindset from, oh, skill RNG to just play the song the way that you need to play it helped me kind of refocus my mentality. And I ended up beating my high score several times to finally finish off with a score that was good enough for T1. And by that point, Ichi was parked, so I knew she wasn't going to be playing again. And Rowlet hadn't really like played the song much for this entire event, so I felt pretty confident that I actually had it in the bag. And you know, and I got this high score with like a few hours left in the event, so there wasn't a lot of time to contest it anyways. And so what ended up happening is nobody contested it. Nobody ended up taking it, and I ended up getting both song T1 and event T1 on the same event. Only the second person to do it after Lights did it in, coincidentally, the previous New Year's event. So that's probably one of my proudest accomplishments, just because the route that I ended up doing for Aquarian T1 was above the max that you could hit with an AP. So I had to actually do optimizations on my route. And I'm not sure if everybody watching this will know what I'm talking about, but just for context, ops or optimizations are basically you try to time the hit on your skill notes because if you hit skill notes like a little bit late or a little bit early, you can actually squeeze more notes into the skill window and end up getting more points. So I end up doing a couple of optimizations on my route, including one that I had to hit the skill note as a great, and the timing for it was so close that if I was even like a fraction of a second later on it, it would have ended up being a good, and the entire run would be ruined.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it was a pretty it wasn't the most complex route on the song, but it was a route that I didn't think I would have been capable of doing previously. So it was just it was a good experience, and it was really motivating being able to go in there and say, hey, I want to do this route, I want to get a song T1, and being able to follow through with it and getting it. I didn't hit like the max possible on that route because I think I hit like an extra great somewhere in it, but it was good enough that I got song T1, and it was a lot more confidence building in my song tuning abilities, just because I was like, oh, I actually can do this. Maybe I'm not as bad at song tuning as I thought I was. So ultimately, when I think about New Year's, I don't really think too much about the event itself, just because it was pretty quiet as an event and not too much really happened. But I remember the song tuning way more because that's what I was primarily focusing on.
For sure.
And it's just really cool being one of only 2 people to have the event and the song T1 from that. So it's just an accomplishment that I'm extremely proud of.
Yeah, for sure. It was really interesting that you mentioned how, like, you're so focused on that sort of RNG skill window. I also kind of think that it might be better to just focus on what you, and this could just be a tip for anyone who's song tiering in general. I don't song tier, but I think in general you should try and focus on what you can control and not what you cannot control. The fact that you can control your own play. At the end of the day, if RNG messes you up, right, that's not something that you could actually control, and that's something that you just have to kind of move on and try again. And especially in VS lives, you could, as long as you have the stamina, like the personal stamina, you could just keep doing it. And of course, if you're not parked, obviously with challenge lives it's a little bit more difficult because of the challenge points you need to actually do it. But it was honestly really, really like interesting to hear those different experiences at T1, how you focus on very different parts of trying to get the high score in the event. And again, you ended up getting for T1 for the Happy New Year's dream, you ended up getting T1 on both song and event, and also the first T1 of 2021 as well. So you have that honor as well. You have that, like, it's so interesting that like the first sort of T1 of a year is always also the one who gets like both song and event. That's honestly quite interesting.
Yeah, I think I just happened to get lucky because normally when I play and I'm tiering, my playing ability also kind of drops off after a time.
For sure.
And it just happened that the event was quiet enough that I had more than enough rest to stay at like a high level for my playing. Like if I want to do this in like certain future events that are more competitive, I don't think that's going to happen, just because I think I will be too dead from playing to have good accuracy or anything like that. So it was kind of just like the perfect storm.
Cough, sisters noise, cough.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it a little bit later, of course. But again, just based on what you've been saying with your T1s and such, I'm just gonna make a wild guess. I'm gonna guess that these events were not the most difficult, even though it's a first place finish, and getting first place is a very honorable position to get, and it certainly requires a lot of work. It's not easy to get T1. It requires a lot of your time, a lot of your resources, and maybe money if you need to prepare for that. But Pastry, what would you say is your, like, the event that you found, or the title that you think was the hardest to get? And I could be wrong. It could be one of those T1s, but what would you say was the hardest event, and why?
I mean, I would kind of agree that my T1s were pretty chill.
Mhm.
But I think what also makes them chill is that I prepared specifically for them as T1s, and I took time
Mm.
off from work and everything for it,
Mm.
so I had free time for it. The events that I thought were actually pretty difficult were Noble Rose 1, um, as well as Summer Zelia and Roselia versus Afterglow, which I did not get T10 in Roselia versus
Oh.
Afterglow. I ended up dropping it and being T11.
Mm.
But yeah, I would say those three were probably the most difficult of the batch, just because they, with Summer Zelia, we had a T10 hover chasing, um, causing everybody else in T10 to have to play more. And so that kind of didn't was a struggle for me just because being limited by work back when Summer Zelia was going on, I was still going into the office for work,
Mhm.
and so it was a period where I was spending 3 hours a day in just commuting back and forth from the office, and then I also have 9 hours at the office. 8 hours
Oh
working
yeah.
and an hour of lunch break. So between the two, it meant I had 12 hours a day for other things, and then I still have to sleep. So I was spending 3 hours a day for sleep, and then the other like 9 hours for tearing. So it was just it was stressful because it was my first experience
Mhm.
doing a podium, and also just the lack of time that I had meant that I had very little room to like move and play. So that was pretty difficult to work around.
Mhm.
And then same thing with Roselia versus Afterglow. I was trying. We also had 11 people going for it, and ultimately, I do actually think I could have gotten T10. But what ended up happening is that at the time I was in Seattle for a program that I was working at. So I was still studying and learning for my program at the time, and then I was also traveling back to New York for Anime NYC, and
Mhm.
Anime NYC was on the same weekend as Roselia versus Afterglow.
Mm.
So it was a similar situation where I was trying to balance work like losing 8 to 9 hours a day for my program with playing and with sleeping and then with also preparing for packing. And eventually I just decided this T10 is going to be competitive through the weekend. I don't want to spend my time at Anime NYC playing, so I'm
Mhm.
just gonna drop.
Mm.
And then last but not least, Noble Rose, which again, again with Noble Rose 1, it's a similar situation where I was also doing work at the same time, and I would actually say no, NR1 was even more competitive than any of the other events that I've
Mhm.
mentioned. It's more competitive than Summer Celia, more competitive than Roselia versus Afterglow, especially because it was a challenge live, and the competition in the other events was pubbers. So we as a tiering server had an advantage in that we could play less hours to keep on pace with them.
Mhm.
But with Noble Rose 1, this was the first event that FHP was a thing.
Mhm.
So you had like Fluffy and and Lemo and all of them playing together and basically getting tiering server rates. So it was like I was fighting another tiering server while also
Mhm.
trying to keep pace with losing time for work and everything. So that was one of probably the event where I ended up having like one of my more dumbest runs because I ended up having to go off of like 3 hours of sleep
Oh boy.
on Friday. I woke up, I went 3 hours of sleep on Friday, went to do 8, 9 hours of work, and then went straight from work into a 28-hour rush, which I then followed up with a 3 hours of sleep, and then another like 30 plus hour rush. So
Oh boy.
that whole weekend was a really brutal grind. Um, but um, I ultimately ended up feeling most proud of that title too
Mhm.
because I ended up pushing myself to limits that I didn't think I was capable of before then, and it was really the event that made me think, yeah, I actually am a pretty strong tier. I
Mhm.
can actually like do competitive events and be okay with it because considering that I was able to do that with work too, like without work, I feel like I would have been at least capable of like competing for like a podium spot if I
Mhm.
needed to. So it was a really big confidence booster, especially like a couple of months prior to Dreams Reality and 100 Poems. But it was also just really brutal coming off of 3 hours of sleep for work every day. So I don't know if I would want to do that again.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned before, right? Again, the other events they were competitive because of pubbers. But again, if let's say an event is contested with multiple sort of tiering servers, this definitely makes things a lot more difficult. And again, as you mentioned before, events are going to get more competitive. There are just maybe more events that will have more competing servers against each other. So. I think this kind of experience, as much as it's bound to, I feel like it will. This kind of experience will happen more often as time goes. So, because of course, this is going to happen where there's going to be more, more events and more tiering servers possibly competing against each other. Pastry, why don't you tell me a little bit more about the true importance of being efficient? Being efficient and why is that so important for tiering servers, especially in a competitive event?
I mean, it's as simple as it comes. Really, you get more songs per hour, you get more points per hour, and if you have more points per hour than your competition, then it kind of puts your competition in a position where they're not getting as many points as you per hour, so they have to play more hours than you to keep up. And if you're already going at a point where you're playing like 21-3 kind of schedules, like 21 hours of play, 3 hours of sleep, it puts your competition into a really rough position where they're forced to be pulling less sleep to try and keep up with you. And so generally the biggest benefit of efficiency is just that it kind of puts you into the driver's seat, more or less. You get to dictate your own pace. If you're getting the best hours, then you'll also have the most sleep, and you can even kind of force your competition into bad positions. For example, let's say like you're already doing well enough with your 21-3, and you're forcing your opponents to try and do like 22-2s or something like that. Then you can just keep playing and play more, and then that forces your opponent to do the same thing and try to keep pace, and that even cuts down on their sleep time. And it just ends up at a point where like you're eventually going to crash. And I think you can kind of see it with a lot of the competitive events, how frequently the server with the better efficiency just wins. I had a conversation a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago. Time is a construct, but but the point is, there was a conversation that I was having with regards to Prelude, Prelude's replay, and with Prelude, it was a tiering server versus a group of people playing in pubcord. And what ended up happening in Prelude was the T1 in the server was behind, and so they had to keep playing more hours, even if they were like dying on easy, to try and keep up pace with them. And it eventually got to the point where they were more or less taken out of the fight because they got a 24-hour feature block, and obviously losing 24 hours, you can't come back from that in a competitive event. So just like it was a pretty rough ending to it. And I remember thinking at the time when I was playing in Prelude, because I was feeling for that tiering server a fair amount because I was going for a T100 there. And I just remember thinking, wow, these rooms are really slow. And later on, and it turned out later on, after looking at the data a little bit, that the pubbers were not really averaging that great rooms. They were getting like 26, 25, which is like decent to like rooms. Like I would say like a good room is like 27, 28 songs per hour. But the pubbers were like a little bit under that. But the tiering server was getting like 24, 25. So they were losing 2 songs an hour to the pubs, which should just not be happening with a tiering server. And so it's crazy to think that if the T1 in Prelude had better rooms, she probably would have been totally fine and would have been way more ahead than she actually ended up being, but
Mm.
her rooms were just not good enough for it. And then you look at like a lot of later events too. You know, like with Devotedly, when the event started, EG and M were like doing much more hours and getting way ahead. But then like once it came to like the midpoint, the efficiency kind of switched a little bit, and Sprite's server was getting really good rooms when EG and M were not really getting good rooms, which is what more or less ended up with Sprite being able to catch up
Mm-hmm.
because Sprite pulled a really monstrous run,
Yeah.
and but also just that EG and M were just not benefiting from good rooms the way Sprite was. So the efficiency switch, the better efficiency at the start is what allowed EG and M to get ahead to begin with, and then the switch midway through where Sprite was getting better rooms is what allowed Sprite to catch up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just like it seems like a very minuscule thing when you think about it. You know, it's just one or two songs per hour
Mm-hmm.
out of like hours and hours and like probably like thousands of songs that you play, but those small little gaps in efficiency end up adding up a lot. You know, you can see it a lot with NFO2 as well. Um, Caster's server was getting 27, 28 songs an hour, which is
Mm-hmm.
like about as good as you can expect it to. And then the other server was getting like maybe like 25, 24. Where there's just like a continuous build of 4 to 5 songs an
Mm-hmm.
hour in terms of lead. And when you think about the fact that they're already getting like only 24 songs an hour, it's like over the course of like 6 hours, you end up being like an hour behind. So they could play a full day together, both going 24 hours, and Caster still ends up being like 4 hours ahead. So that's
Mm-hmm.
4 hours of sleep Caster can afford that the other server couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
those kind of efficiency losses make such a big difference, and ultimately, I would even say that like your playing ability as a person is less important than having good efficiency
That's
because
yeah, that's actually a big that's a huge point because again, at the end of the day, if you really want to be efficient, and I know for a lot of people when they first go into like a tiering server or they feel like they want to go tier, the priority is actually to play as well as they can, which it is true. You do want to play as well as you can, but I think the efficiency thing is something that newer players really have to understand, and it's going to be a tough transition for them if it's like the first tiering server and it's a competitive event. It's a really big transition to suddenly learn how to be efficient with your menuing. But again, I think we're doing what we can to try and better educate people to be efficient and really just let them know why it's so important. And in all the examples you just mentioned of devoutly towards my dream, that's actually the first time I heard it from the other servers' perspective. So that was quite interesting. And then, of course, NFO very recently, one
yeah,
or two with Caster and how he was able to pull ahead so well and so efficiently over the others. That was
yeah. I
quite
mean,
interesting.
when you have a situation like Caster is really strong, right?
Mm-hmm.
He went what like 40 hours for his first rush.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like if if you're doing like the first day alone and you're already ending up like 8 to 9 hours behind, there's just like so little you can do to catch up at that
Mm-hmm.
point. You know what I mean?
For
Like
sure.
even if you can improve your rooms again and get to like the same level, you still have to end up playing an additional 9 or 10 hours more than Caster does to
Mm-hmm.
catch up. And Caster's Caster, so he's not really going to give you that chance to begin with.
Yeah, for
So it's
sure.
like you really can't um, rely on personal skills so much like that. Maybe if it's a challenge life, it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But with your average events like a live goal or mission life, having like efficiency loss is pretty bad.
For sure. For sure. And again, for newer players, this doesn't really make them more comfortable with joining a tiering server for the first time, and it also happens to be competitive, and you don't want to let the team down. But again, everyone learns from somewhere, and it's just gonna be more and more likely that you'll join when, if you're new, you're gonna join when it's maybe a competitive event. And we'll do what we can to help you and support you and make sure that you learn the ways. And of course, once you're open to learning the ways and making sure and really understanding, I think the main thing is to really understand the importance of why efficiency is so important, and hopefully we're able to convey that and show that efficiency is definitely very important.
Yeah, I mean, it'll also come down to T1 too, because the T1 is also going to be the person that kind of dictates this too. Like maybe if Prelude's T1 had been more willing to kick people out who are slow with efficiency, they would have been able to keep up with it. But because they didn't do that, they kind of almost let it happen, versus like certain other events where if it is a close fight, the T1 will be a little bit more strict on efficiency, versus like an event like New Year's, where I was kind of like, whatever, we don't have competition.
I'm not even
we don't really
focusing
need to
on
worry
event
about
tiering.
it.
You're not even focusing on event tiering anyway.
But I mean, even then, if your efficiency isn't necessarily like that good, and maybe this is something that's like out of your own control, right? Because for some people, they might just not be tapping properly or not doing what they should be. But in quite a few cases, it just ends up being like people being slow because of net or connection. And in that case, it's just like that's not really something you can necessarily control, right? Sans like getting better connection, which maybe isn't an option for people. But that's why we always have G2s. You don't necessarily have to be in G1 to play. You can always play with G2, where the standards are a little bit more lax, right? You don't have to be on the ball so much. You can just play in a more relaxing environment. For sure.
Pastry, we're going to reach the end of our podcast very soon, but of course, just before I let you go, we were talking a lot about efficiency and a lot of numbers related stuff. But I just want to quickly dig a little bit into your knowledge a little bit more, because again, you have multiple T1s, you have a podium, you have a lot of T10s. But in terms of like being well decorated, are you based on the I guess, I don't know, like some sort of Bandori leaderboards, are you one of the most decorated tiering players out there, or are there people who are even more whale than you?
Well, if we're talking just event stats, like event titles, I'm probably I think I'm top 5 at least in terms of like total titles. And I'm pretty up there overall there. Song tiering, no, because in song tiering there is a K10, and K10 is an entirely separate beast all on his own. But yeah, I would say like as far as event titles go, I think 12 total T10 plus, which would put me like top 5 overall. I think the only people that have more are Clipsy. Clipsy has the most, and that's 19 total. Clipsy is also a really, really crazy person, because he did, I think, 10 or 11 of his T10s in a row. So that's just like, he racked all that stuff up in the span of like less than a year or something like that, which is
it's like bonkers. What, 10, 11 events in a row? That's like 4 months.
It was absolutely bonkers. But yeah, I think Clipsy has the most at 19. And then but obviously Clipsy is retired and has been for a while. And then the next up is Kevs, who's probably close enough and will end up being the most in terms of titles overall.
For sure.
Kevs has 17. And then I think after that is Niboshi at 15 and Homie at 13. And then there's me at 12. But Niboshi is retired. Homie is still playing, so it's probably a race between me, Kevs, and Homie to see who ends up being at the top. But also Caster's coming up slowly right behind me. So trying to maintain that position.
For sure.
I will say that I have a lot of T10s, but I am a little bit less decorated when it comes to podiums because I only have 3, so that will change soon. Um,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
there's, I think the podium record right now is 7, and that's Wisp, Hanaya, and Caster, who all have 7 podiums. Should all go to plan, I think I will also finish. Um, I think I'll finish at 8 podiums when all is said and done, assuming I don't pick up any new events. But yeah, I used to pick up a lot more T10s just because it was easier to get them in working around work schedules. But now, and so that would end up in a situation where I was just going for T10s every month, pretty frequently. But nowadays, I think I want to spread them out a little bit more and just go for higher titles.
Sure.
Because at this point, I barely really earn my T10s too much. So I'm pretty happy with where I am on T10s. I'd like to start getting more podiums.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of upcoming podiums and upcoming sort of plans, what are sort of your plans on future events, and what are you going to tackle? What's your to-do list?
So the first and foremost is the next event after Summer Glow comes up. I'm going to be going for my first T2, actually. Believe it or not, it's actually the only title I'm missing at this point.
Nice.
But I'm going for a T2 with the Melody of a Dignified Wind event. That's the Sayo and Kaoru event. And then I'm actually going for a T3 on the event right after with Taihina. And then after that is the big one, which is I'll be going for T1 in Prismatic Duo, the Sayohina Xmas event. And, I also have like a T10 coming along there. And I have one other podium that I'm interested in, but I don't want to discuss it right now because I haven't fully decided on how I want to do this.
Yeah. That's
Maybe
fine.
2.
Okay. Whale
We'll
thoughts
see.
there.
We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, the primary ones are really just my first T2 with Dignified, my T3, my second T3 with Taihina, and then going for T1 in Prismatic.
In Prismatic, yeah. Well, for sure. Again, it's a pretty busy schedule. I think for a lot of people, I feel like these events near the end of the year, I think, are generally much more popular and contested. So they're going to be, it's going to be quite exciting, I think, to see how the storylines go. And of course, in Dignified of a Melody Wind, I will be joining the top 10 roster. So we'll definitely be in each other's company by quite a bit. And by the time you listen to this podcast on YouTube, for those listening, the event's just about to start. So if you want to, of course, show your support, feel free to send to join my Discord. Just send me a message or send any of the mods a message, and we'll be able to maybe see if we'd be able to get your support. So we'll see how that goes. So and of course, your upcoming T1, which is your T1 in what was supposed to be November, but maybe actually closer to October now. Now with the recent news that just came out like literally hours ago that it might be a 6-day event with all these 6-day average events.
Yeah, I'm still not sure how I feel about that, truth be told. It'll definitely be interesting from like a timing perspective, because I normally plan to take time off from work for this kind of stuff. So it might be like kind of difficult to reposition it, because it depends on like what I'm really doing with my work at the time, whether I'll be allowed to take that time off or not. So that's kind of like something I have to think about now. And also just, things coming up sooner means I need to be prepared more quickly.
Yeah, you have to be prepared sooner. Like that news really just came out hitting us like a wrecking ball, and this was literally hours before this podcast started. I'm honestly not looking forward to the fact that some events are going to be shorter. I understand that they want to close that gap, but oh man, especially with competitive events, especially like yours, Prismatic, when there's like at least 3 tiering servers. I don't know if you guys will get sleep that week. I really don't know.
Well, I wasn't really planning to sleep much anyways. So,
Well, maybe it's
actually,
better that way.
actually, from a competitive tiering standpoint, it might even be like preferable to have shorter events.
Hmm.
Well, so the thing is, it's not preferable in that it makes it harder for me to plan out when I can take that time up. But in terms of the
Mm.
actual event coming up, it being shorter means A, I'm spending less money, and
Mm.
B, I can pull dumber hours that I maybe wouldn't be able to do if it was longer. You know what I mean?
Fair,
Like
fair.
if I was in a 8 or 9, 10 day event, I can't just pull 48 hours casually because I will probably crash by the end of the event. But
Mm.
if if the event is shorter, maybe I can because I don't need to be as ready to fight for longer periods of time. It turns it
Sure.
from less of like a marathon into like a sprint,
Hmm.
and um, I think I can do better in sprints
For
than I
sure.
would in marathons.
Okay. Well,
That might just be my sprinter history talking there,
for
but
sure, for sure. I mean, again, I just hope that no one compromises their health too severely in these shorter events. So definitely make sure you take care of yourself when that event comes up, Pastry. I know you have a lot of people to support you as well. So, and again, if anyone wants to support Pastry on his upcoming events as well, feel free to join the server once more. Pastry's in the UNGA Academy, and you can private message him, and he'll be able to guide you on next steps on where you could go to support it. So I'm sure
yeah,
he'll
feel free to
very
reach out. I don't bite, I promise.
well, Pastry again. Honestly, it was a great honor to have you join
Oh, thank
today's
you.
podcast. We talked so much about many different interesting topics about tiering and just being able to hear a lot of different experiences from a much more veteran tier than I am. It was very endearing, and I hope that many of our viewers were able to learn a few tips as well, and be able to learn from that experience as well, and especially if they're really new, perhaps even take the next step to join the tiering community.
The so-called pastry effect, as people call it.
The pastry effect, yes, indeed. Do you have any last words or last shout outs to our viewers before we end our set?
Yeah, I'd just like to say again, thank you for having me on the podcast. It really is an honor to be on here. Even if it's more of a casual setting per se, it's still endearing to know that so many people are interested in seeing me on the podcast and hearing what I have to say about things.
Sure.
Just being known as somebody that's so prominent in the community is not something I really expected to ever be in position wise,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just really nice to be able to just sit down and talk about things like this. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these things don't really come up very frequently.
For sure.
Like how we don't normally talk about older events a lot too much.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just fun going back through my old experiences and thinking about it now, especially in my perspective now, 12 titles later. How did I feel? How was I so off with Neo aspect?
Yeah,
But
for
yeah,
sure.
and just in general, it was a fun podcast, and I
Yeah,
definitely really enjoyed being here and just chatting with you like this.
yeah,
And
for sure.
I'm a big fan of the podcast so far. I've been listening to every single one of them, and so it's going to be fun seeing myself in there and um, the whole what is it now, like an hour and a half of
Yeah.
podcast.
Lots of content feeding everyone. Everyone here with this episode.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was a blast. I really enjoyed it, and if you ever want me back on, I'm down to do this again.
Oh, for sure, for
I
sure.
definitely have things I haven't been able to talk about that we can talk about later.
Yep. No, I'm more than welcome to have guests return. So my hope is that once maybe once you get your T1 title, we'll invite you again. But even if it,
Yeah.
we'll see. I'll definitely try and find time to get more of our guests return. And again, as you mentioned, this podcast is just a way for people to share their experiences where they really haven't had the opportunity to do so. I had that feedback from many of our guests so far. Just being able to share that experience and knowing that not too many people, at least some people out there are interested in listening to it. So
Right.
it's quite interesting. So again, this project will continue. Maybe the set is complete right now, but as we all know, refilling never ends. So again, Pastry, thank you so much for taking the time to join us in our
Anytime. It was
studio.
my pleasure.
For sure. And again, feel free to join the Discord if you want to, speak with our special guests at any point. And of course, our community continues to grow, and you'll look forward to more weekly podcasts soon. But for today, the set is complete. Thank you all so much for listening. This is your boy, SVPhilos4, and we are signing off. Until next refill, guys. Take care.